Hey everyone, let's quickly summarize the last episode first. We met the peculiar Aardvark and saw how the animal symbolizes the first agriculturalist for the Bamana people of West Africa. The Bamana were one of the last cultures that gave up their animist belief and eventually converted to Abrahamic religion. Animals in iconography represent natural processes, observed and experienced within daily life of the believer. In Bamana tradition, one such chimera is called Chiwara. It is composed of the aardvark, the pangolin, and the rowan antelope. Chiwara is the hero who taught the first people how to work the land. When a natural environment changes severely due to climate change, this connection between the observed behavior of an animal and its mystification does no longer take place in the subjective experience of the people. Its origin slowly disappears from cultural consciousness into the foggy, indeed mystique realm that we know so well from temple religions. In other words, the origin of religious icons is lost in the folds of time. We have seen this in India, where termite mounds have gradually been replaced by the image of a goddess. It is my attempt to do a reverse search, so to say, and try and reconnect some of the symbols, like the primordial mound or the swastika, back to their origins. The end result may seem less spectacular at first sight than some would like. Last episode, I talked briefly on the desertification of northern Africa after the ending of the Neolithic subpluvial period at the end of the fourth millennium. This happened gradually, but over the course of a millennium, it caused a huge migration of animals southwards, causing the hunter-gatherer groups who used bow and arrow to follow their game. And archaeological findings also show a different group who migrated north. According to the interpretation of their hunting material that is found, they were basically hunting aquatic animals mainly. We saw how during this wet period there were rivers and savanna lands. A very large part of the center of the Sahara was marshland with large deltas and huge river systems. I made a comparison with the Okavanga Delta, where monsoon causes yearly floods, and the vital role of the termite hills for the wildlife. Now in South Sudan, there is a region that caught my attention since it very much reminds of the particular situation in the Okavanga. It is called the Sud, and it is one of the largest marshlands on the world. Some suspect it is the actual source of the Blue Nile. This land is called the land of papyrus, in what behaves like a living labyrinth of ever-changing waterways. Only patches of elevated earth offer steady ground for people to build their huts upon. A lot of these elevations are created by termites. The lush green you see in the pictures are mostly floating beds of plants. Almost all of it is papyrus bush tied together into floating mattresses by creepers like water hyacinth. This was a nice find. I think it sort of gave me courage at the time to go through with my mission here. I added a few very good documentaries in the additional info list on my page concerning the archaeology and history of the Sahara, not just on Nilotic people, but as well on the Libyan desert. Most amazing that Sahara is like a giant open museum where a lot of sites are still there as if they were untouched. When we think about ancient Africa, we think about most will think about Egypt. It grabs our interest and somehow ignites our fantasy easily because of the monuments that they left us, their enigmatic writing, their religious iconography, the wealth they left us. Not us. But it is actually in the central Sahara that an unknown civilization already performed mummification thousands of years before the Egyptians even started to practice. They are said to have belonged to what is called a cattle cult, and they performed sacrifices just like the Egyptians did many years after that. Pottery charts from 6,000 years ago show a finer artwork than that of the Egyptian pottery at that moment, and their presence in the Nile region indicates a considerable influx from these Central Saharan cultures into the Nile civilizations during the third millennium. That original culture, which is thought to have been spread all over the larger part of the Green Sahara, remains an intriguing mystery. These people eventually had to leave that land of lakes and reeds as desertification urged them to migrate together with their cattle. There is a lot of bickering among historians and archaeologists who about on who was in Egypt and who had major influence when and who built what or why. And I will not even try to add my opinions and all that. Egypt is a very central area, the gateway that connects three continents together. So cross-fertilization is logic itself. The general ideas we have on Egypt stem from a time when archaeologists assumed the Sahara had always been that insurmountable barrier like they saw it, but the past does not get the attention it deserves, which is really sad, I think. But let's go back to our Aardvark. I propose this is the Seth animal, so it's time I make my point. If you are totally unaware of the role of the ancient Egyptian deity Seth, the lord of the desert and the land beyond, then I advise you to go read up on that. I have to try and keep it very brief here. I will use examples of the argumentation given by Professor Pierre deMaret that substantiate the claim that Aardvark is the animal associated with this desert god, and as we go along I will add my own finds as well. deMaret gives us an overview of the different interpretations of the Seth animal going around among the historic community. The larger part of the researchers throughout the years insist on and or argument for it to be a composite or chimeral mystique non-existing animal. Others claim it to be a canid or a donkey. Seth will later be identified by the Greeks and the Romans as Typhon and is sometimes depicted as a half a donkey, half snake-like god. By that time, Seth had already lost all positive connotations in Egypt and was regarded as the dark and destructive counterpart of Osiris, the solar deity. Also, Abrahamic religion eventually integrates the Seth figure into their mythology. It seems that the majority of the old researchers had a hard time accepting the resemblance between an elegant, powerful god with the plump, nocturnal, pig-like Aardvark as they perceive it, if they had ever seen an Aardvark even. They were not familiar with the character of this animal in the way Africans are. It is therefore not that strange that the majority declined the idea. Nevertheless, the resemblances are there. Physically, in the typically down-bended nose of an Aardvark, sniffing the soil, In the meantime, his big ears straight up, monitoring its surroundings for noises. Its tail that points upwards and is often provided with fur. And we know already that for several Central African cultures, Aardvark has an important symbolic role as a mythical hero, as a creature connected to ancestor world, or because of supposed spiritual or medicinal power. If not a deity like Seth, it is considered powerful and a primal spirit. Aardvark forages at night and lives in a burrow. Also, when in danger, it manages to dig a hole to escape very quickly. It will use its considerable power and sharp claws to defend against a rival and enemy, and will often do so from an upright position, the latter resembling a human posture. Each night, Seth leads the solar boat through the underworld. Seth, the shapeshifter, sometimes wears the head of an incarnation of Horus the Elder. Sometimes he is depicted as a human figure, or sometimes even as an Isis knot holding a wasp scepter. Because of its habit of digging a nest underground and being nocturnal, the Aardvark aka Anbear is associated with the underworld and the dead. Seth is the one who guards the night sky and the souls that reside there. He is both the opposite but also the companion to Horus. He is both the opposite but also the companion to Horus the Elder and the murderer of the sun god Osiris. Associated with chaos and destructive force, he plays a dark but necessary role as one of the primal deities of the early kingdoms, representing transformation. Also, Aardvark is, because of its ability to destroy hard soil, associated with destructive energy that allows growth, as we have seen in the Bamara lore of the hero Chiwara. We saw how the pangolin, which is one of the chimerical animals of Chawara, is connected to kingship, and also Seth performs together with Horus his role as a kingmaker of the Old Kingdom. When Aardvark is busy at night, it can be very noisy, and it moves in a distinct, disorderly way. It is often said to resemble a drunk. Also, Seth is the god associated with alcohol. deMaret points out that there are observations of Aardvarks digging up dung balls to munch the beetle larvae inside, and he connects it to Seth eating the eye of Horus, as is told in mythology. I found something to add to this. Since the oldest examples of glyphs showing a Seth animal were found in the south of the Nile Valley, I started looking there randomly to see if I could find any clues to Aardvarks, and that is how I found the termite mound settlements of the Nuer people in the Sood marshes of South Sudan. It is in that region of the Blue Nile that I found more of these fire beetles. A few months ago, I also found these pictures here of termite mounds in a South American place with lovely glowworms on them. When checking if these beetle larvae also occurred in Africa, I found a few examples of African varieties in the Nile, in the Sudan region, I mean. The larvae live in the outer shell of a termite mound, and by glowing, they attract termites and other animals on which they feed. In its turn, the anteater will, of course, devour the glowing worms. One particular kind of these beetles does not only glow in larvae stadium, but also as a full-grown beetle. These beetles fly to the top of the Acacia nilotica, on which, where they feed on the bark, while they are glowing away. I don't know about you, but I see several sacred Egyptian symbols connected here. Not to say these are the origins of ancient religious concepts, but it does give us an impression of what the ancients might have seen and how the lack of rational explanations for these phenomena might eventually ended up in some of the fantastic stories of religion. When foraging, the aardvark will encounter a snake sooner or later. From the initial episode on, I explained the anthill snake connection. The African beaked blind snake probably cannot really stand model for a monster like Apophis or Apep, since it is small and harmless, but we know snakes of all kinds seek the cool environment of abandoned mounds to hang out. I even wondered if there is a connection to some of the later depictions of Khnum, the god of pottery. An aardvark, the nose of an aardvark, used to flirt with the soil as it searches for food, reminds everyone of a pig's nose. Pig is a general symbol for an earthly deity connected to chaos but also connected to fertility. Also, here I see similarities with Asian deities like Varaha, who saves the earth goddess and has the head of a boar, and like Yama, who acts as a mediator, leading souls either to heaven or to hell. The oldest Vedic texts do mention a boar who grubs in the primordial waters and thus creates the primordial mound. When Seth steals the eye of Horus, which is the moon, he does so in the shape of a black pig. Nut, who is Seth's mother, is associated with the sow. As Egyptians observed the occurrence of a sow eating a part of her piglets when she has not enough milk to feed them, the association reflects in the story of Nut swallowing the sun. As Seth's position in the late period demotes from a destructive but inevitable and necessary counterpart of the sun god into a Cain-like murderer, also the with him associated pig has become loaded with negative connotations. He turns into a black pig and desecrates the eye of Horus, thus cursing the pig. That is why there was no pork eaten by the Egyptians from the Middle Kingdom on, long before the birth of Islam. Go read deMaret's work. He gives us several more arguments, which I cannot all go into here because it's too much. I must say it is in no way a vindication by deMaret. He does not go as far as to claim African origins of Egyptian culture, but it does offer substantiated arguments connecting both African and ancient Egyptian cultures via symbolism and relating them to a common ancestral belief system of the Neolithic cultures that lived in a land that is now the Sahara. There is no trace of aardvark fossils so far in Egypt. A fossil was found in Khartoum, or north of Khartoum, Sudan, that dates back to the 5th millennium BC. And that is considerably more north than today. Aardvarks can only be found in equatorial Africa and along the Nile in Sudan. It is not necessary that we would find them all the way up north, since Seth has always been very much present in the south and the oasis. There are several archaeological sites in the desert east of the Upper Nile region that have rock art showing the Seth animal. These sites are located at settlements in the near of oasis, where the habitation gradually concentrated during the climate change of archaic times. And the oldest petroglyph dates back to 4000 BC. Somewhere during past times, aardvark becomes a metaphor for the impregnation of earth by the sun, for marriage, for fertility, for working the soil. But this concept traveled southwards, along with the animal itself. The explanation for such an antique deity and his totem animal becomes hard, considering the environmental change that the area underwent. Still, I believe it is in the natural world that we should seek the answers and not in the realm of the imaginary. Another example is those depictions of the snake deity we see in Egyptian iconography, and more specifically the snake with the legs. If one considers the presence, the looks, and the behavior of the Nile monitor, the Varanus nilotica, then why look anywhere else? We try to decipher symbols of the ancients, but often fail to do so from the context in which the ancients lived. And although some researchers have touched on the idea that the aardvark is indeed the set animal and stud model for the was scepter, they mostly fail to pronounce the idea of a Central African origin for Egyptian culture. From west to east, the animal begets a revered spiritual position. To this day, it is often connected to ancestry, it shapeshifts into human like at occasions, and killing an aardvark is, in some cultures, considered as bad as killing a human. Aardvark plays a role as a mediator between opposites, as the one who locks up the sun in his burrow. In the last episode, we saw why it represents the spirit of agriculture for the Bamana. If the vast scepter is a representation of a stylized adze, a Neolithic hoe, then I think the circle is round. Scholars are not really familiar with this unique animal, for it is really unique. Although it has been around for many, many millennia, there seems to be no other animal that is related to it, except for this little fella here, the shrew. As if to underline this for me, I happened to see this video in my subscriptions a few days ago. It's from the Harvard Semitic Museum. Find the link underneath and it's on mummification. Very informative, and it is an entertaining lecturer as well. I will let you listen to what she has to say on the shrew.
Get this mound, and you can see here, there's a bit of a, they're interspersed here are birds as well as shrews. The shrew is this is this big, in its Sunday best here, nocturnal version of the sun god, he who can see well at night. Often you find them with raptors, diurnal version of the sun god.
Before I close off, there is still this. I imagine some of you sort of expected me to ask the question if pyramids are modeled on termite mounds, and I must admit that in the very first weeks that I was following this crumb trail, it crossed my mind, and I did do searches on the net. This led me to at least 2 other channels that had a video on YouTube in which they propose or ask this question. Mr. Uncensored, for example, points to the ability of termites to harvest or mine water from incredible depth, and what he wonders if the Giza pyramid might be built to this image and represent an ancient water pump. There have been books written on this subject, one of the more plausible explanations out there in my opinion, but after finding the architectural biomimicry and especially the Qanat system of the ancient Persians, I doubt the builders of the pyramids had termite mounds in their minds. What I can imagine is the shape was adapted, whether it was African or an Asian influence is hard to say. West Africa has the habit as well of building, or had the habit of building pyramid shaped monuments and even temples Sadly, this memory of these buildings is as vague as the pictures that we have left. And in the east, we saw the stupas, and there was the gradual transition of Earth Mother cult into Hinduism and later Buddhism, leaving traces in religious architecture. I will not add anything to the idea myself. Of course, there is an obvious connection to the earliest Egyptian pyramids that were actually used as a tomb for royalty. But the Giza pyramids are so much more than that. I very much would advise you to follow the channel of SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. His work is genuine and very substantiated. Anyhow, that's it for this one. It took a bit longer than I imagined again. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all soon for the last episodes. Bye bye.